In an exclusive and quite frankly candid interview, Sir Jim Ratcliffe discussed his first year at Manchester United, the challenges he has faced and the future of the club. He addresses fan frustrations, managerial decisions, financial constraints and the broader restructuring needed to bring United back to glory. While he acknowledges his and Ineos's mistakes, he remains optimistic about the club's long-term vision. In today's video, we're going to be going over all of the key points from Sir Jim's conversations with Gary Neville and friends. First off, the challenges of the first year. Sir Jim admits that his tenure at Manchester United has been far from easy. The scrutiny from fans and media has been more intense than he anticipated. He understands the fans' frustrations, but believes that significant changes were necessary to turn the club around. He jokes about once enjoying reading newspapers over breakfast, a habit that has now become less pleasant due to relentless criticism, saying, "I used to enjoy picking up a newspaper and having a croissant. It's not so enjoyable anymore. It's not pleasant to read the press coverage. The way I get through it is I believe what we're doing is the right thing. I believe what we're doing has to be done in order for United to compete for trophies." So Jim acknowledged that Manchester United were not going to win the Premier League in his first year. He emphasised the importance of long-term vision. The club's decline over the past 12 years since Sir Alex Ferguson's retirement means that a period of restructuring was inevitable. Evaluating Erik ten Hag. So Jim openly admits that retaining Erik ten Hag after the FA Cup final was a mistake. At the time, his team was still assessing whether the club's erratic performances were due to the manager or the organisational structure. With hindsight, he acknowledged that ten Hag's tenure should have ended earlier. Here's what Sir Jim had to say. Under Erik, it was erratic, I think is the best word I would use. They turned up against Manchester City like they were in an FA Cup final, but against Crystal Palace, they didn't show up. This shows another side of Sir Jim's personality, and as already mentioned in previous videos, he's not afraid to criticise the players publicly, just as any fan would. Neville then goes on to ask if Sir Jim would have sacked Erik ten Hag after the FA Cup final had they found a suitable replacement in the summer, to which he says, it was too early for us to make a big decision in reality. We hadn't been together as a team for very long. Omar, Jason, myself, and Dave. This is the first mention, by the way, of Ashworth in the interview. We hadn't been together for very long, just a matter of weeks. It's quite difficult to extract Erik's performance from the structure around him. Today, there's a really strong support structure. Ruben and Jason talk 2 or 3 times a day. Omar speaks to Ruben every day. Every time I go to the match, I speak to Ruben. It's quite interesting to hear about the inside of the club and how they operate in terms of their communication. Given the fact that Ruben and Jason are in constant communication, no wonder Ten Hag didn't last very long under Ineos, given that there were multiple reports that Ten Hag and Jason Wilcox didn't have the greatest working relationship. But it was quite difficult to see whether, what environment Erik was operating in. Was the erratic performance a function of Erik or of the organisation? And we couldn't really get to the bottom of answering that question with certainty, so we gave Erik the benefit of the doubt. When asked if he regretted giving Ten Hag the benefit of the doubt, Sir Jim was actually quite frank and honest, saying, yeah, it was the wrong decision. We made the wrong decision. It was an error. At the end of the day, it was a wrong decision, so my hands are up. Which, if I'm being perfectly honest, a lot of people will look at this and say, oh, Sir Jim, he's terrible. He's admitted he's making mistakes. Ineos out. But I would much rather an owner who will come out and say, yep, we have made a mistake here, and they look to correct it, rather than just living with it. The transition to Ruben Amorim. Despite poor results, Sir Jim praised Amorim's work ethic, honesty, and ability to extract the best from an injury-ridden and unbalanced squad. He highlighted how the young manager has had to adapt to a team not built for his playing style, while also dealing with language barriers and the intense pressure of leading one of the world's biggest clubs. Here's a few things Sir Jim had to say on Ruben Amorim. I think he's done a great job in the circumstances, frankly, with the squad that he's had available. The fact he came in mid-season, everybody expects miracles overnight. It's not the way, not real life, in my view. Half the squad's missing for Ruben. If you look at the top 8 players in terms of salaries in Manchester United, 50% of those are not available to Ruben. You've got Mason Mount, you've got Luke Shaw, Marcus Rashford has gone, and Jadon Sancho, and he's got a bunch of other injuries, as you know. So I think he's done a fantastic job. You have to give the guy a bit of a break. I mean, give me a hard time. I have no problem with that. But give Ruben a break. I think he's a good guy. He's working hard, and I think he's doing a great job. I really, really like Ruben Amorim. He's a very thoughtful guy. Every time I go to the training ground, I speak to Ruben. I sit down and have a cup of coffee with him and tell him where it's going wrong. And he tells me to F off. I like him. So Jim hasn't been the only United board member coming out to Amorim's defence, with Berardo also coming out to support the Portuguese. He was very clear with us. Ruben told us, this is how the team is going to play. I'm going to stick to my principles. I think that's what we want, which is a coach who has a clear vision. A coach who can work with Jason Wilcox to identify the types of players for the system and the style of play that Ruben is trying to implement. So it's safe to say Ruben Amorim's position is safe. As mentioned earlier, Sir Jim is happy to throw these players under the bus. He was questioned on how Amorim is doing and has flipped the topic to the players, saying essentially this is the best he can get from these dopes. Last summer's transfer window. United's recruitment last summer was chaotic, given that key decision makers had only just arrived. While Erik ten Hag was involved in discussions, he did not have final say over signings. Here's what Sir Jim had to say when asked whether Erik signed a lot of the players in the summer. No, he didn't sign a lot of those players, but he was involved in the discussions, and he influenced. I mean, at the end of the day, a decision for a player doesn't come down to one person. It's a group of people who influence that decision one way or another. He did have a voice, which is why there's one or two Dutch players. This is actually hilarious. Sir Jim is calling out the recruitment of De Ligt and Zirkzee here, as well as Ten Hag. How long did we as fans call out Ten Hag's talent ID for being exclusively players who were Dutch or played in the Dutch league? We now have confirmation, given the fact that he's the one who wanted the Dutch players in the squad. A shift in transfer strategy. Looking forward, Sir Jim promises a more structured recruitment approach, prioritising players who fit Amorim's system. He also highlights the need for better data analysis in recruitment, an area where rival clubs have been more effective. When asked whether he supports what Amorim has done with Rashford, Antony and Garnacho, Sir Jim said the following: "Correct, I do. I think he's doing the right thing with the players. He has to be in charge of the dressing room. He's got a set of principles and he wants the players to abide by his set of principles, which is that you have to be totally and utterly committed to winning the next football match. That's what he wants." Gary Neville then went on to ask, next summer you're going to have to recruit to Ruben's specific system. Are you unequivocal that you're going to make that step and back Ruben and he's going to be here at the start of next season? To which Sir Jim replied, yep, but bear in mind I am backing the management team. It's Omar, it's Jason, it's the management team that operate Manchester United. Sir Jim has also been vocal on the business decisions of years gone by when it comes to signing players. Here's what Sir Jim had to say. If you look at the players we are buying this summer, but we didn't buy, we're buying Antony, we're buying Casemiro, we're buying Onana, we're buying Højlund, and we're buying Sancho. These are all things from the past. Whether we like it or not, we've inherited those things and we have to sort that out. To clarify, Neville asked, the club owe nearly £400 million, don't they, on players who are still in the club? And Sir Jim passed on that one, saying, I don't know the exact number, but I know the bill we will pay this summer is £89 million for players that have been signed previously. So we are still paying off players from 2 or 3 seasons ago that we signed. It's actually ridiculous. Ashworth saga. Now, it was only a matter of time before Ashworth was brought up. Obviously, there have been prior reports to Sir Jim not getting along with Ashworth, which ultimately led to his sacking. So Gary asked what went wrong after they had chased him for 8 months. So Jim had this to say, you may know Dan better than I do. I don't want to go into the details of it because it doesn't serve much purpose. At the end of the day, it was chemistry, maybe a bit more, but let's just say chemistry, and it didn't work. When asked if that was chemistry with himself or other members of the management team, Sir Jim laughed, saying, just chemistry. I know it's an unpopular decision and it's seen as an error. It was an error, but again, in our defense, we did recognize scrutinise it as something that would not work, and therefore we decided we would make a change. What would have been far easier because of the scrutiny would have been to live with it, but I wasn't prepared to live with it, so that's got to be part of our mentality at Manchester United. Even though we're having to make unpopular decisions, if we think it's the right thing, then we're going to do it. I know lunches and things like that aren't popular, but now notice here how Sir Jim brought up the lunches himself. That's cue to say to Neville, yeah, I don't want to talk about Ashworth. Let's talk about another controversial thing. So Sir Jim gave him the bait and Gary took it. However, Neville did still tie Ashworth into the conversation, referencing that £15 million was spent to remove Eric Ten Hag and Dan Ashworth, which are expensive errors. £40,000 was cut from the former Players Association. Why not host a charity dinner with Bruno and Maguire where you could raise this £40,000 rather than cutting it completely? This is the question Neville posed to Sir Jim, and Sir Jim's response was actually quite shocking. He said, well, nobody suggested that because I would have supported that, which in my opinion obviously isn't a good look for the club given the fact that no one even considered hosting a charity dinner to make up for the funds that they were looking to cut. But again, this did show Sir Jim's willingness to hold his hands up and say, we messed up or we missed that. I know there's a lot of frustration towards Sir Jim, but it's quite refreshing to hear when we've heard radio silence from the Glazers for the past 12 years. Inheriting financial issues. Sir Jim reveals that the club would have run out of money by November this year had they not taken corrective measures. For financial mismanagement under previous regimes, it's a major concern, but he remains confident in the club's ability to become profitable within the next 3 to 5 years. To show the severity of the situation, Sir Jim even came out and said there's no money left in the club, and that is after injecting £300 million himself. Controversies over cost-cutting. Certain cost-cutting measures such as removing free lunches for staff and reducing funding for former players have sparked outrage. While Sir Jim defends these decisions as necessary, he acknowledges that because of how the club has been run, it's a necessity that the free lunches be taken away rather than a want. Sir Jim actually made a few decent points over why free lunches should not be given to staff. Here's what he had to say. We have to go to the bank down the road and we have to borrow the money to give everybody a free lunch. 95% of the people in the UK don't get a free lunch. I don't get a free lunch. I've never had a free lunch. Nobody in Ineos gets a free lunch, and the vast majority of people don't get a free lunch. It's a nice perk if you get one, but in the modern world, most people don't get a free lunch. And at the moment, Manchester United can't afford to give people free lunches because we have to go to the bank and borrow it. And I don't think at the end of the day, it's fans' money, isn't it? The fans are the guys that are paying for these free lunches because they're the guys who buy the shirts, pay for the tickets, and the TV subscriptions. Should I be spending the fans' money on a free lunch, or should I be spending the fans' money on a new player who might win some silverware? When asked whether we can both give free lunches to staff and win silverware, here's what Sir Jim had to say. Yes, we can, but not today. We're trying to draw a line. You can have a free lunch, and then this guy can drive an S-Class down to London, blah, blah, blah. You get blurry lines on what's acceptable. The number one issue for the club is to get recruitment right. That involves data analysis, which we don't have, but some of the better clubs do have. And then I think in 3 years' time or 5 years' time, Manchester United will be the most profitable club in the world. It will have the most iconic stadium in the world, and it'll be winning silverware. Well, there you have it. So Jim has set the expectations that us as fans should now have. So if 3 to 5 years down the line, we're not the most profitable club with the most iconic stadium in the world, and we're not winning silverware, his head be it. Relationship with the Glazers. Although Sir Jim only holds a minority stake, he is effectively leading the club's football operations. He admits that the Glazers have made serious financial mistakes, but stops short of outright blaming them. He attempts to shift some of the responsibility onto previous executives, such as Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold, though Gary Neville challenged this stance. Gary started the topic by saying, "You're an incredible businessman. You will understand alignment in business more than anybody. Your money is being whittled away," which again, Sir Jim, showing his humour, responds with, It's all gone. And he starts laughing and continues to toe the party line by saying, "The Glazer family, let us get on with it." This is the part of the interview where Gary really does challenge Sir Jim the most. Neville says, "You're providing a shield for them though. You're now starting to get the flack that they've been getting." So Jim tries to deflect with humour again, saying, "I'm getting quite a lot of flack, yeah," laughing again. When pushed further, Sir Jim said this, "Yeah, it's true, but change is always uncomfortable. I think I have to accept the fact that I'm going to be unpopular. I don't know how long I'll be unpopular. Maybe I'll be unpopular for a long period of time, but I think it's worth being unpopular to fight our way through the changes that are necessary to get Manchester United back to where it should be. And hopefully attitudes will change if we come out the other side with a successful outcome." I know a lot of people have a problem with the Glazer family, and this part of the interview is gold. Gary responds to this saying, "Rightly so, Jim. The blame is all on the Glazers," and so Jim is desperately trying to play devil's advocate here, and this is where he begins to clutch at straws in order to keep his working relationship with them alive. When defending the Glazers, here's what he had to say. "However," long pause, "the Glazers gave the previous management a lot of rope. Too much rope, obviously, but you know the management, the previous two teams of management, have to take a lot of the blame for the decisions they made at the club." He's having to deflect blame to the likes of Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold, but he's really clutching at straws here because the people who appointed those two were, yep, you guessed it, the Glazers. Fair play to Neville here. He's not just whimpering to Sir Jim, he's standing on business that the Glazers are the main reason to blame, despite Sir Jim's attempts at deflecting. Sir Jim is actively moving around in his chair more than the entire interview during this questioning. He's clearly not comfortable having to defend the Glazers. The only line he can come up with to defend them is, "Ultimately, they have not been involved in the level of detail," but Gary Neville butts in, saying, "That's negligence. If they have been overseeing the club to the point where it's running out of cash, that's negligence. You know that better than anybody." So Jim, for the 1000th time when put in an uncomfortable spot, resorts to humour, saying, "I'm not looking backwards, I'm trying to look forwards," and laughs, where Gary laughs as well. The elephant in the room is huge. So Jim knows that United are in a terrible position because of the Glazer family, but to keep the working relationship alive, he literally has to defend them or not say anything about them. He is still only a minority stakeholder. We need to remember this. On one of the final topics discussed, Sir Jim described how his life has changed since becoming an owner and why he became an owner of Manchester United. Here's what he had to say. "I think ultimately we'll come out of this difficult period and we'll find ourselves in a, much sunnier place. I do. I mean, otherwise I couldn't deal with what I'm having to deal with at the moment, because it's not very nice when you go home to Manchester and you've got people saying some quite unpleasant things. That's not very nice. I don't need that, to be honest, at my age, because I really like Manchester United. This has been my boyhood club and I believe we can sort it out. I think we'll get there. Manchester United is the greatest football club in the world. It's the world's favourite football club. It's the biggest football club. Everywhere I go on the planet, there are Manchester United supporters. Last summer, we crossed the border between Mongolia and China. As soon as we crossed the border, they didn't want to check my passport. They just wanted to take a photograph, People expect instant gratification in the modern world, but this, of all football clubs, this is the super tanker. It's huge. It just takes time. A long-term vision for success. Despite the current turmoil, Sir Jim remains optimistic. He envisions Manchester United becoming the most profitable club in the world, boasting an iconic stadium and a squad capable of winning silverware. And following the interviews being released today, we've also received further updates on United's plans for a new stadium. One report coming from the BBC. Manchester United are expected to announce tomorrow plans that could see the most iconic stadium in the world being built to replace the existing Old Trafford stadium. A nice moment at the end of his interview with Gary Neville was when Gary began a sentence with "one huge positive," to which Sir Jim replied, "Are we moving on to a positive?" with them both laughing, knowing very well it had been quite an intense interview going over the downfalls of Sir Jim and Ineos rather than an optimistic one looking to the future. The huge positive Neville was referring to was the plan for United's new stadium, which he had got a glimpse of in a special task force meeting, calling it incredible. The interview was then concluded, not before Sir Jim had his final say on everything going on at Manchester United. Here's what he had to say. We'll have a great training centre, the world's greatest stadium. It won't be a small stadium, and it'll be a very profitable club. The vision for the future is fantastic, but we're in the trough at the moment, the difficult phase. We have to face the music a bit really. I know it's been a bit difficult for the club and the supporters, but at the end of the day, we absolutely want the same thing as the supporters. That's our only objective in life, is to see Manchester United winning silverware again. In my opinion, Sir Jim's interview was a rare moment of transparency from Manchester United's leadership. Lord knows we've not heard anything from the Glazers. While his time at the club has been filled with controversy and difficult decisions, his vision for the club clearly remains ambitious. The next few years will determine whether he can truly deliver on his promises and return Manchester United to its former glory. So let's wait and see. Let me know what you make of Sir Jim's interviews in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and subscribe for more honestly biased sports content. But for now, Godspeed.